But you guys you got hunting stuff on there. I've seen a few of your turkey hunts. And, just tell us about the show itself.
So our concept is we wanted to kind of have multifaceted. We wanted to have the fishing, which is a major thing, especially with the charters, and then the hunting, because that's the love during the off season, which is there is no off season. Because we go fishing, hunting, shows. So then, and then we just kind of keep going through that stuff, and then we decided to add it with having the couple side of it, and we've done like the wine tasting tours. We went to Lake Placid. We've done maple syrup. There's a place out by us that basically, so we saw the whole setup of how they do it, and they serve pancake breakfast and all this other stuff. So we make it a show for everybody, which actually one of the great examples was a friend of mine he told me he was sitting there watching the show, which it airs Saturday in the Buffalo area, then on Sunday, Rochester and Elmira. And he was sitting there watching it, and it was actually a turkey hunting episode. So his wife walks by. She's like, "Oh, what are you watching?" He's like, "Turkey hunting, Jim's group and everything." So he comes back through, and it was part of the wine tasting thing. And she's like, "Now what are you watching?" He's like, "The same show." So she sat down to watch the rest of the show. So I'm like, there's our ticket right there.
Yeah, that's an experience.
Yep. And so that's kind of where it all came, and it's kind of taken off its own little life.
A little bit of work, huh?
So today we're going to talk about filming your adventure, and just kind of we're talking fishing. So if somebody wanted to kind of get started in documenting their fishing trips, what's kind of the first step that they should think about doing?
Equipment wise, I mean, nowadays you can get into some quality equipment kind of on the lower budget side. I mean, everybody's walking around with a phone that now, I mean, with all the upgrades, they're 4K. I mean, you're taking what you would normally go out and buy a camcorder that you could spend $500-$600 for. You already have one in your pocket. Small Rig makes a nice frame for it where you can put an external mic, external light. You buy the whole set for like $170. And basically, a lot of guys are using it for close-ups and interviews. It has its own little tripod and everything else. GoPros. You can't beat a GoPro. I mean, they'll take every abuse to it. You set it for the auto capture, set it on a rocket launch on your arch, your whatever you got, and clip it on there. You hit it one time, it's recording.
Yeah, I run a YOLO stick on my photograph where you take fish in the river and goes in the stern light socket and pulls 12 volts, and I can film. I run a 64 gig SD card. I can film 4 days of multiple double trips on that gig. Never stops. It just pulls the power. My question to you is, one of the issues we have is because of the way those cameras are made, sound. How do I capture good sound on a GoPro? I've got a GoPro at the back of the boat. I'm up front 20 feet away. How do I capture? Is there a way that capture better sound with a GoPro camera?
So the newer GoPros, which is basically like, if you're looking at the 9, 10s, and 11s, you can buy the media kit, which has an external, kind of has a microphone built on the frame, kind of like putting a shotgun mic on a regular camera. But then you can actually add an external, so you could have a remote, and you could even buy it for your phones now. For $30, you can have a remote lapel mic that plugs in for $30. I mean, you can go crazy on Amazon now and get all this stuff fairly cheap, and that would be the best way, because you have so much outside interference with everything that's going on. So you can go on Amazon, look around, they got an answer for it. If not, go to eBay, they got it. It might take you a little longer to get it. It's coming from somewhere, who knows, but that's been one of the big things. We just stepped up some of our stuff to split the inputs for the mic, so we can do more of the lapel style stuff with the multi-channel, like you're saying, with the shotguns, multiple angles and everything. So to kind of get rid of a lot of that. On the hunting side, our worst nightmare is leaf sounds. Walking through leaves is the loudest thing. It actually almost seems like it's louder than a gunshot. Sometimes they're like, "What did I say?" I was there. I can't even remember what I said.
Yeah, you've got those weird sounds through hunting just because you've got so many different things going on. But one of the dangers and one of the things you run into all the time, if you're going to do a fishing thing, is wind. You're out there and it's hard to get away from wind when you're out in the middle of a lake. So how do you kind of defeat that wind when you're out there fishing?
So the old dead cat, which most people it's just like, where'd that come from? Well, if you see it, it explains it. Most, I would say dead mouse more than
windscreen,
windscreen on it. But that's one of the big things on the editing side is with good editing, we're using Premiere, so we can actually pull a lot of that sound back out of it. So it becomes a challenge no matter what you're doing. But you want to get, I like to get the candid vocals, especially sometimes when you miss a fish with a net.
Whoops.
Because that was one of the other things with our show is we were gonna have the failures. I missed the big buck, had a failure with, it was me. I thought it was a gun, it was me. And then we've had misses with the nets, and we've had stuff like that, and that's all part of the show. I'm like, I've told everybody that's on it, if you can't have a failure on there, you're not going to be on the show. So it's the real life. That's what we want to put out there, the fun of it, and sometimes the agony of defeat.
Having that dead mouse on there is big. And the other thing I would tell people is just get that mic as close to someone's face as you can. You know, if I'm trying to shoot you and my mic's way out here, I'm going to get more wind, less voice. And here, I'm going to get more voice and less wind. So,
well, the advantage with the POV stuff is you can get those close shots. Everybody thinks I have to be back in the back corner of the boat. I can be sitting this close to you, and we can get a good shot. That's like you're saying, you can get close without worrying about, I'm going to miss it. And you're not going to miss it. Especially with editing. Now we do everything in 4K. So we can push it out. We can pull it in. So that's, I mean, iMovie, you can get away with just about anything from home. But if you're going to take it to the next level, I mean,
so what software are you using?
We are using the Premiere.
Okay.
So
is that a product is that a third-party product? Is that something?
Basically, it's kind of like Final Cut. We were using that. The only issue that we had with that was that we couldn't share it with somebody. So if you were working on something and you were like, hey, Jim, take a look at this and see if you can put some music to this or something else, I'd have to do it from you, and it just kind of ties things up. And now all of our shows have to be closed captioned. So now it makes it easier for us to export it, because it's too hard for us to sit there and try to do it.
Yeah.
So you send it out, and a couple hours later it comes back.
Jim makes a great, I hate videos with wind noise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're in the video business like you are, good sound will cover for a bad picture.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good picture doesn't cover bad sound, right? Mm-hmm. So, our problem is sound, right? And I was curious to hear you say Premiere, where I can actually kind of, because what I use, I can't work those sound levels.
Oh yeah,
right? I can't get rid of the background noise.
And that, like I said, that was one of the things on your cameras, just to split it so you can actually concentrate on what you're trying to pull out of it. So you can boost this and back that down.
Yeah, that's probably the most common question I get. People want to know, what camera should I buy, and what software should I use for editing? And Premiere Pro is an Adobe software. It's a subscription. You can go on. It used to be you had to buy the thing, and it was like $1,000 or $1,200 to buy it. And now it's a subscription software. It's about $20 a month.
Yep.
And the nice thing about that is, I mean, I used to buy the software, and 3-4 years down the road, you'd have different codecs coming from cameras, and it would be useless. And now you always have the updated. You always have the best. And the other thing that would happen is, if you're trying to figure out how to do something, you go to YouTube, and they would show you how to do it, but like that was with a different version. And now when you go to those YouTube videos, they all work, because it's everything that you're using is always the newest, latest, greatest thing. So if you're really looking for some powerful tools to do editing, I think, especially if you're using a PC, that Premiere Pro is really the way to go. So.
Yeah, like you said, now it's $20.
Yeah.
So what if I want to get a little more professional, right? Let's say I want to have some kind of handheld actual camera, and do that stuff. Where is kind of my budget? Do I need to spend $5,000? Can I get into a camera at $400? Kind of where's that budget to have something that a guy can come up and take a close up, and we can film. We can film our own adventures kind of as a TV show. Where's that limit at?
It depends on how really you want to get into it for the clarity. The big thing is like color clarities and stuff like that. The cheaper cameras wash it out.
Okay.
You get more pixels. I mean, for $1,000, you can buy a fantastic camera. But the thing is, if you're looking to do, I mean, you can run a quality show with a $1,000 camera. It's going to be a better show with a $3,000, $5,000, whatever. But for the everyday guy, for a couple $100, you can get into, like I said, a cell phone's 4K.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, nowadays, even like when we're airing our TV stuff, we're filming in 4K so we can manipulate it before we put it out there. Most of that actually being broadcast is 1080, and a lot of them are 720. So we're taking that big thing and crunching it right down. So really the quality of it, to even put it on a show, you don't really need it. I mean, if I put it at the seminar, I actually showed a difference as we were doing the video. I was like, that's the GoPro. This is like, we have a 20 series, and then a G50 is an incredible camera. And now we just went to a mirrorless, which is like night and day. But I could point it out, and the people that were sitting there looking, they're like, I don't see any difference. Yeah. And I'm like, but it depends on how far you want to get into it. And I think you start out, I'm always, even like fishing gear, you don't start at the bottom. You spend the most that you can on that thing, like I said. So if you're going to buy rods and reels, what are you going to spend money on, the rod or the reel?
Right.
You're going to buy a gun, you're going to spend money on the gun or the scope. So that's the main tool. You can pimp it out all you want with everything else, but
if you don't have a good capture video, yeah.
Most people, $400, $500, you can get into something really decent. If you wanted to push it, $1,000, you out of the box, you can get everything you wanted to do with it. It just depends on how far you want to go. And I just tell people, get something, because I'm not going to use it. Once you have one and you get the kind of creative thoughts going, you look at stuff like, oh, that's cool. Well, now when you video it and you take it home, you're like, that was really cool. So now you start getting those ideas kicking in your head.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to next. We've been talking a lot about equipment, software, and all that stuff. And those are nuts and bolts things. But what we're doing really is we're creating art. We're not working on an engine. We're creating art. And I think that creation part and the idea part is really the part where a lot of people kind of fail at. They can go out and film their buddy reeling in a fish, but how do we tell that story? And how do we go into the day? Obviously you don't know what's going to happen. That's the tough part about doing hunting and fishing videos is maybe today you're going to shoot a giant buck. Maybe you're not going to see anything. Maybe you're going to shoot a doe. Maybe you're going to catch small fish today and you're not going to catch the big one, So, but you still have to have some kind of pre-production, some sort of plan going in. So how do you come up with the ideas to start building a story so it's not just a video of Lance reeling a fish? I mean, that's, I guess, would be fun the first time, but after that, we're like, all right, we're tired of seeing that. Tell us the story.
B-roll is the biggest thing. It's just, you go out there with the idea, we're going to go fishing with Lance today. So pretty much you start out with, we show up at the dock, okay, walking down the dock, and then kind of a little tour on the boat and whatever else. And then you just keep building it from there. And all that stuff, you might only use 10% of it. You might not even use it at that time. The next time we go out, we could maybe use some of it. And we're hoping for the big finale.
Right. The payoff, right?
But sometimes that buildup is the whole story, kind of like a deer hunt. So when you shoot the big buck, that's the finale. But like you're saying, it's building all the way up to there. Like, what did you go through? Like all the gear and everything else. At the Detroit River. If you've never been to the Detroit River, that's what I want to show. Like, I don't want to show, okay, so we went out there and we didn't see the sights and everything else. So as we're going out there, I'm filming everything around there. On the way out there, giving a little rundown of what we're doing, where we're going, who we're going with, and then what are the sights there. And on the charter, you're you're a tour guide. You're not just a fishing guide, you're a tour guide. Yeah, I want to know about what happens at the Detroit River. Is that Canada over there? I'm like, that's the stuff that you got to tell the story. And it's pretty, to me, it's kind of simple because I'm a guy that always asks questions. So I try to answer my own questions as I'm doing it. So.
And people who tell stories. Mm-hmm. You're a good storyteller, you're going to be doing it. That's what
you would be fantastic at this.
I'm trying. I don't have any room for hats in my closet. I gotta get rid of one before I can add another one.
I think that goes into the story part of it. I think people like to see what the boat looks like from not just inside the boat, but outside the boat too. So how about a drone? You guys use a drone?
That's one of the things that we've messed around with, kind of lower level, and it's been decent at the pricier side. I mean, you almost donated yours on my boat that day.
That's just part of the deal. And that's why I like
the only thing is you're saying we got to make sure we get the card.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But even now though, so what we're talking about, the one that I have is the DJI, it's the Mini Mavic, and it's a $400 drone. Mm-hmm. So if you put it in the drink, it's a bad day, but it doesn't ruin your week,
So that's what I've been looking at. I've been looking at the Pro, and then been doing some research on the Classic, because that's a lot of guys are telling me that's the way to go, because it's more stable with the heavier winds.
Yep.
It's the bigger platform, longer flight time, especially if you deal with winds. So it's kind of, that's the next step we need to go to. And we've messed around with some of it. And like I said, we're lacking. That's the only thing we're really lacking.
Yeah. And the other thing with that too is DJI has a software. So if you actually did put it in the drink, you've got the video on your phone. You can download it. I mean, it's pretty slick. So even if something really bad happened, you'd still get your video. You'd have to go buy a new drone, but you'd have your video. But just incorporating those elements, and we were talking about GoPros, and those are just fun tools to have a different shot.
Yeah.
So if we're out in the boat and we're filming fishing while we're out there, you may have that GoPro sitting up high somewhere, and you're getting that kind of all encompassing view. But it's also good to have another camera that you can put right in the guy's face.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to do it on a budget, I mean, you can get a GoPro for $300 now, and you can get that close-up shot with your phone.
I'll make it even better. I've got 4 of them from Amazon. They're called Dragons. They're $24.99, and they shoot better video than my GoPro 8 does.
So there you go.
They take 64 gig cards, and they are amazing. And I don't mind putting one on the boat without a case, so I can get the sound right down where I'm netting. Because again, if it goes in the water, it's $25. Now, is it quality to do a TV show? But for what we do with it, right, to edit it and do tips and do things, it's awesome. So
I mean,
and I can buy 4 of those.
Yeah, I mean, even the GoPro, I mean, they're not the perfect thing. Like the 8s, 9, I'm running the 9, 10, and 11s. I mean, it's great with the front viewer and everything, but the batteries are horrible. So they came out with a better battery, and I've been running those, and they're better, but it's...
The thing that I like about the Dragon is I'm not committed to GoPro. GoPro video always gave me a problem. Always gave me a problem. This is just regular MP4, and away you go. So it's a lot easier for me to get into regular software and play.
Well, the
with,
big
right?
thing, that price, you if something happens, you're not worried about
Don't
it.
care.
But I've messed with other ones, and housings break. You can't get a new housing. You go to get a battery, you can't get a battery. So it's just like, that's the biggest thing, is be able to get, if something happens, repair the parts or just buy a new one. So, but I mean, you could definitely get into it on a cheaper.
Yeah, I think for most people that are watching this, that are interested in doing this, they're not sitting here thinking they want to be the next Jim Steele and have these shows. What they want to do is make a YouTube video. They're going to start there, and you talk to people all the time. I want to get my own YouTube channel going for fishing. So you're talking about probably some things that are just not quite as involved. And I guess what I would tell people is the best way to do it is to do it, because you're going to fail.
Yeah, have fun with it. Yeah.
And it's going to be bad, and just keep doing it until you get better. So tell me about what you've done over the last 3 years, and what your show looked like, episode 1 compared to what it is now.
We were looking at, because you're your biggest critic. I mean, that's all of us with everything that we do. So it just, and that's kind of what feeds the fire. I mean, it started out as the fun of doing this, and it kind of progressed into, was I planning putting it on TV, and was I planning on multiple? I'm like,
Nope.
No, but it's there, just like when you first started fishing. Were you planning on sitting in the seat that you are now? I mean, it just kind of happens that way. And I've always been the person that I still want to keep the love of it. I don't want to, even if it is a job, it shouldn't be that miserable job. Like, I can't wait that, even on the charter side, the guys that come up to me, I can't wait till I can pull the boat. I'm like, that's a sad day for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, been a long season, but
I tell people this isn't a job, but there is work to do.
yeah. So
that's
like,
where I'm at with it, right?
Like I said, we started out with kind of lower budget stuff, and kind of like the editing stuff. Things weren't 100% in frame. I mean, kind of like you have to get the thought in your head about boxing the frame out to keep people, and especially moving targets when you're following things through, even people walking, about basically where do you put them in the frame? Everybody's like, oh, you send them in frame. No, you don't. It's just like, I didn't know that before. It's just like, oh, it's a camera. You put them in the middle, you take a picture. It's a video camera, got to be the same thing. It's just like, no, it's not like that. And so as you grow with it, and like I said, YouTube is an incredible I mean, everybody's a YouTube hero, but there's a lot of information out there that you can just click on your phone. And like you said, especially on the editing side, we're like, we really need to do something with that. And you're like, okay, you're watching video, click, click, click. Like, so that's been, it's kind of a big transition to paying attention to more of the little things that we were missing before, that it was good enough before, and now those things aren't good enough. So
let me ask you this: how much planning goes into shooting a show, right? So obviously you got an idea what the show is going to be. You know you're going to need some B-roll. I mean, are you 2 months out? You're making a list. You're kind of running through this, or is it just kind of you're on the boat and you just kind of wing it? I mean, how much planning goes into this is what we need to shoot. This is kind of some of the angles I'd like. I want to get this B-roll, and how much of that planning process is there?
In the beginning, we had just a big stockpile of stuff we had done over time. So we were picking from it, but then when you look back at it, it's just like, I really don't want to use that. So now you start getting the thoughts of, we need to do that again. And then like you critique your own self. So we do a show out of fish in the Western Basin. So now when we went out, we did this, but we didn't catch so we're out there, we looked at the water the whole time. We're fishing in 15 foot of water, and I never looked towards the shoreline. And I'm like, how did I miss that? So I'm like, okay, that's one of the things. Next time we go out, we're covering the whole view of everything, and like went by the lighthouse 3 times, and we only got one picture of it. I mean, that's like when you came out with us. First thing I do, we come out, we got the old power plant. It's there. Everybody's like, oh, what's that? And we got a lighthouse right behind it. So slow down, get pictures and everything else. So now I'm thinking that way.
So do you hit the boat with a production sheet and say, hey, I want this shot, I need these stills, I need these videos, I need these angles. Do you kind of check that off?
I'm a terrible.
I know your wife's not.
I'm a terrible list person. So which I hear about all the time. Why don't you make a list? I'm like, I have one here.
But we're getting too old to keep up here.
So I do okay with it, but like I said, it's one of those things where I just film everything I can possibly think of, and it just, you got to get creative. I mean, the water level shots it's huge. I mean, you can just run alongside of it. You lower it a foot, it's an entire whole view. You said, I mean, it's crazy, like, to incorporate in the view of it. I mean, you did it yourself with panning the rods up in the rocket launcher. It's just like, who thinks of that? But when you put it together into a show, that's all the pieces. Like, okay, there's the gear, there's the boat, like you said, and now there's the area that you ran, the techniques and everything else. It's
just those angles and points of view changes the whole thing. And it was something that when I went to college, my professors would say, shoot the ordinary thing in an extraordinary way. And if you go out and you start thinking about that when you're out there, like, what's a different way to shoot this that I've ever seen before? Like, what's a different angle to get this thing that you don't typically see? And those are the things that when someone's watching your video, they're like, that's
cool.
Yeah. And that's how you keep people watching.
I can tell you that's one of the things. Like, we'll do stuff, and then when we get it all set up and we're on, and I'm watching it, I'm like, that's cool. And I'm like, I did that. I'm like,
didn't mean to, it was by accident, but that's really darn cool. That turned out really nice.
Well, I'm looking at our bullpen here, and our next guest is not here. So, Jim, we'll keep you here for another 12 minutes. And let's talk. You brought up, I went fishing with you about a year and a half ago on Dunkirk, and I was there, I think 3 or 4 years ago for the school. Let's just talk about a little Eastern Basin walleye fishing for a few minutes here. It's a different type of place than what a lot of people think of when they think of Lake Erie. You know, my dad from the Chicagoland area, he thought of Lake Erie as kind of that Western Basin. That's where he would go to do it. And what you guys do is very different than what you do in the Western Basin and stuff that Lance does. Tell us about that Dunkirk fishery and what walleye fishing is like up there.
Somebody at some point drew lines in the bottom of the lake, and the fish are the only ones that can see them. Because I can tell you certain baits that you can run in the Western Basin, I couldn't buy a fish in the Eastern Basin. And it's which is funny, because you would think with the migration that we have that comes from the Western Basin, we'd be catching those fish on the same exact thing. It's different. So on my mind, as they move down, they're foraging on different stuff. So it doesn't make sense for them to eat the same things down there. And it's just like, you got to put all the pieces together. And shuffle them up sometimes. But ours is kind of different because we can actually hit deep water fairly close offshore. So we can actually, coming out, we have some shallow water structure and we have deep water structures. So as we come out, we can mess around with bass. And then we can get into the walleyes that are in the shallow, and then we can get into steelhead, some browns, and push out even deeper. We're getting the deeper water, open water walleyes. Then we start getting into some lake trout, which is, I mean, we can 30-pound lake trout that when you're trying to catch it on walleye gear is fun.
Yeah, a little bit of work, yeah.
Fun, or you're donating gear. So
yeah, you guys have that deep water bite, and when I was there before, we were catching, and again, I'm a northern Midwest guy. We were catching walleyes in 80 feet of water, 60 feet down, which seems like for people who grow up or fish where I fish, is like that sounds stupid. Why would you even try doing that? But that's the way they are there, and it's a different type of fishing than I think where you'll find anywhere else where you're going to find walleyes. So just kind of go through like what that program looks like when people are going to want to go out and try to target walleyes in that kind of water.
Our water temperature is a major thing that kind of tells us where we're going to, because we could be fishing. I can tell you we fished 100 foot of water and we fished the first 30 feet. And then the fish hawk is my biggest tool that I rely on. It runs nonstop. So we can be fishing 30 or 60. I mean, we've pulled big walleyes right off the bottom. And to me, those are the guys that they've already had their cheeseburgers and they want to go down and sit in the air conditioning.
Yeah,
so it's just, to me, it's just, you got to be able to transition through it. I've had guys that come from out west and they're like, okay, where do we go fishing out of, I'm like, go out to like 65 feet and start fishing. They're like, how deep? Like 25, 30 feet? I'm like, no, they're right on the bottom. Okay, well, if I go out deeper, would I keep running it? I said, well, like the one time Greg Lemire comes out. So he calls me, he goes, I did what you said, I caught an 8-pounder. I said, okay. He's like, what do I do with it? I said, are you going to eat it? No. I said, throw it back. He's like, but that's an 8-pounder. I'm like, you'll catch another one. So he goes out. He was fishing 100 foot of water, 80 feet down, had no clue how to get there, just kept snapping weights on it, trying to figure out how to get it down there. I'm like, go deeper, because at that time, the water temperature, basically the thermocline set up, pushed all the fish down. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing is we fish the water temp. We have, I mean, when you guys were there, especially the currents,
Yep.
I mean, the subsurface currents are huge there. So it kind of creates highways for our fish and the bait. For the last couple of years, we've kind of haven't had the big bait school. So I kind of fish the areas that I know that the fish should be there, kind of like waiting.
Right.
And the bait's going to be there at some point. We don't have the big bait balls that we used to years ago. We don't get the big migrations. We're fishing more of our local fish, which, I mean, still good numbers. We have great hatches. So
I think it's a big thing coming from Western Basin to here. First time I fished out here, I fished Dunkirk 2001 in a PWT tournament. And what really impressed me is, just like Jimmy said, so many options, right? Traditionally on the Western Basin, okay, this happens, here's where you do. Well, now you've got thermal stratification. You've got wind pushing cold water from the middle of the lake and 150 feet of water up against breaks. You've got the major break down the middle of the lake. You've got it's just a whole, there's so much more when you come over here than the Western Basin. Fishing's still fishing, but there's more to pay attention. So there's a lot of different in the movements. There's a lot more macro movements as opposed to just micro movements like there is in the shallow water. So
we don't
it's a whole new game.
Like you ever said, you got to fish where the fish are. So
Fish where the fish are.
I'm like, I know there's fish there every time. It's just like, so it's a milk run at some point, and some days it's more milk than others.
I think that's the truth. So let me ask you this. You said this a couple times. It kind of stuck in my head because we do on the Detroit River. Are there areas and times of year that you go fish and you fish them because at some point fish are going to show up there? Or are there other times that you're chasing, you're actually looking for fish to fish as opposed to fishing a piece of structure that fish are going to be on? Are both of those an option? And does that type of stuff change with the time of year or certain kind of weather when you kind of go chase fish or sit on a spot, wait for the fish to come? Kind of what determines what you're going to do there?
So I could take the easy out and say yes.
Yeah. No, you can't do that. You got 5 minutes to go with something better than yes.
So there are areas that we know, especially coming out of like the Cattaraugus Creek, kind of, we call it the second 80. So basically, as you're running straight out, so you're the borderline 6 miles out. So pretty much you're almost fishing out along the border. So basically, it drops down to 80, comes back up into the 70s, and it drops back down. That's been a spot out there for years that basically when that midsummer comes in, right through to when the fish would turn around to head back, that would hold fish out there. And what's funny is I drag cameras on the bottom to see what's down there, what structure, what's holding them there. There's nothing. And I'm like, one of those water wolves, I dragged it down and I'm like, I'm going to lose this thing. I'm going to get stuck on something. I'm like, there's nothing down there. I'm like, there wasn't even like a boulder. It was a rock. And then there was nothing. It was dirt and sand and everything else. I'm like, why are they there? And then that's when we started messing around with the subsurface currents, and that's a steady flow right through there. So to me, that's a transition area where they're coming through. They're holding up there because the bait's going to come right down through there. They can sit there and put little effort into swimming and just kind of hanging out there, waiting for it to come, waiting for the waitress to bring the food. So to me, that's always going to go to midsummer right through the end of our season. Our structure along the shoreline in spring, it always holds. And that kind of drops off a little bit during the heat of summer. You got to kind of pick and choose.
Right.
And then we kind of get our little offshore of the structure. We got some deeper water structure, and I think those fish kind of play in and out. I mean, and then we got the Canadian shoreline, which is only a couple tail kicks away. And that's just an entire whole different world over there, because with all the rocky structure that's there, and that's been holding big fish over there for the last couple of years. They're not getting the big numbers, but they're getting bigger fish, and they're all feeding on gobies.
Right.
So now, after everybody's figuring out what a goby is, and it was a bad thing, now it's a good thing. Now we don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but we know everything's eating it. And the thing is that you can catch them in, like, at first, they won't be deep water. Oh yeah. And I remember when it was first coming, Lake Ontario, the salmon won't eat them. Well, I went to the big weigh-in, and DEC was there cutting them open, and what was falling out of them? I'm like, you might have went out for a steak, but if a cheeseburger's in front of you.
Right. So that's actually Jim Lemon just posted on here. He doesn't see huge schools of smelt in the Eastern Basin like he used to.
Yeah.
So you're talking about gobies as a forage base. How has that changed the fishing? I know you've been around for a long time. From the days where you had smelt.
You're old.
You're old. Just that forage-based change. How's that changed things?
Like I said, we used to get the gizzard shad, especially.
Yep.
We used to get that. That was a migration along with the walleyes. And years ago, 1970, Lake Erie in our end was a dead lake. So to me, for it to flip around to be one of the top 5 cleanest in the country is an incredible thing. And I think everybody's like, oh, we did this. No, Mother Nature did it. Let her do her thing. And so we lost kind of the shad part of it. And I think part of it was like Dunkirk, we lost our power plant. So there's no hot water discharge. Yep. Buffalo, kind of the same thing. A lot of the factories down there stopped doing hot water discharge. And that was pulling those fish down that way. Everything would follow along with them. So now we lost that. Now we had great smelt. That's kind of, we used to see huge schools, even the smelt, and that's kind of backed off. You'll find big pods of emeralds, and that's kind of where, when I was talking to you that one time about you'll never see an emerald over 35 foot, I'm like, come out to where we are and you'll see them suspended 40 feet down in 50 feet of water. I'm like, and you're like, no, those are flies. I'm like, no, those are emeralds. So it's transitioned through the primary, even like feeding on perch and stuff like that. It's not because that's spiny, that's kind of the secondary that they're going after. So, but there's always something. That was one of the big things I was always questioning with the DEC. I'm like, you say these numbers that we're going to have, and it's going to keep growing and growing. That's fantastic, but we're going to have the forage to be able to support it. Yeah. And they said not the preferred forage, but there will be enough.
And all that.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answered any of it. But
Jim, we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you sticking around and talking to us and kind of helping us out get through the show here. Sometimes people get lost in the show and get talking to people and they kind of lose track of time, and you help to stick around and talk with us. And
it's always good seeing you guys, and it's kind of little back to normal.
Back to normal.
Little back
We're
to
getting
normal.
there. We're getting there.